At some point, just about everyone will have to set up a project with a third-party service provider. Maybe you're a consultant who sells your expertise to customers. Maybe you work on a shared services team at your company and you deliver project work for other internal teams. Or maybe you're a homeowner and you're looking for a general contractor to renovate your house or a handyman to do some repairs. If so, this video on setting up successful projects can help you establish the right expectations to minimize hassle, reduce risk, and build consensus around project pricing. A key part of this will be determining whether to use a fixed price or a time and materials billing model for your project. I'm Sam Wong, and I'm a startup CEO coach. I specialize in great execution in the workplace. I've done management consulting and professional services for about 2 decades. I've proposed, sold, set up, and/or delivered about 300 large-scale projects in my career, including many million-dollar engagements. Let's get started. Research done by the Standish Group indicates that only 16% of projects finish on time, on budget, with all expected functionality. That means more than 5 out of 6 projects either partially or completely miss expectations in terms of scope, time, and cost. That's just an absolutely horrible track record. And the problem isn't just limited to the workplace. A survey from the Consumer Federation of America indicates that home improvement and construction issues top the list of worst complaints. So how do you fix this problem? To address this, you must look at the 2 parts of every project. First, you have the project setup, which usually involves some type of pre-sales conversations. Once the engagement is set up, the service provider delivers the work in some type of post-sales project. Projects can run into problems either in the setup or in the delivery phases. Many people address these issues in the delivery phase, which is understandable because many problems arise post-sales. There are many resources that focus on methodologies and frameworks to deliver projects successfully. Most of them focus on general project management and control. But we're not going to focus on the post-sales delivery in this video because so many other resources are available to address this part of the problem. Instead, we're going to focus on the pre-sale setup of the project. We're focusing on the project setup because that comes first and it can be just as important as the post-sales delivery. In fact, Peter Block says in his book, Flawless Consulting, that setting the right expectations up front avoids downstream problems. Most people ignore the project setup and suffer for it. I have first-hand experience with the importance of project setup, including many fixed-priced engagements. After over 2 decades in management consulting and professional services, getting knee-deep in project management and delivery, negotiating, writing, and executing several hundred proposals, contracts, and statements of work, I've enjoyed very successful projects as well as survived horrible projects from hell, including some where I shared in the blame because I didn't set up the projects correctly. I certainly learned some very hard lessons from setting up projects the wrong way, which meant I had to live with angry customers, overworked teams, and unhappy managing partners who wanted desperately to close the book on a very distressed project. Fortunately, you can learn from my mistakes and avoid a lot of pain. Basically, my hindsight can be your 2020 foresight. In fact, I haven't just failed at a few projects, I've also failed at several startups. Looking back, I've been the CEO, CTO, or a technical VP for 5 different startups, and I've been an advisor to several other startups. The first 2 startups were very promising, but ended up shutting down for very avoidable reasons. Thankfully, the last 4 companies on this list were acquired. Today, I typically serve as a CEO coach or an interim CEO, CTO, or CFO, and I wrote a book on startup execution, and I develop and I teach startup training classes, which you can find at our website, fundablestartups.com. My company, Fundable Startups, provides premium coaching, training, and tools to help startup founders succeed. A lot of our content and services can also help large companies find success. Enough with the stroll through history. Let's break down this lessons learned into 2 sections. The first briefly covers project management theory and concepts. The second covers the practical applications of these concepts in real life. First, a little bit of theory on setting up projects. Every project has three core components: a scope, which is what the project will accomplish, a time frame, which is how long it'll take to get it done, and a cost, which is what the customer or user will pay for the project. Experienced project managers know that they have priorities starting with your constraints, which represents the top priority. It's referred to here as a constraint because at a high level, if you can't meet this requirement, then the project shouldn't even be done. For example, if the project's objective is to build a bridge over a river, then a constraint might be that the bridge has to support cars driving from one end to the other. If the bridge collapses when you drive over it, then don't even bother to start building the bridge project. The next priority is what you try to optimize considering the constraints. If the constraint takes the top priority, then you basically just do the best you can with the next priority. The final priority is what you have to accept. These parameters create a 3x3 matrix. Now, you may not want to have a last priority, but the project management realities are that you can only have one check per column and one check per row, as illustrated here. And if you change any location of any one check, then one or more of the other checks must move. As a startup coach, most of the companies I help are cost constrained and must do their best with the scope and accept the time frame, or do their best with the time frame and accept the scope. Let's look at an example of how to determine the priorities of a project. When President John F. Kennedy spoke to Congress about going to the moon, he said the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. If we pull up the 3x3 matrix from the previous slide, we can map out the project priorities. The scope was the top priority because he said the goal was to send a man to the moon. We weren't going to send a dog or a monkey, and we weren't going to just send him into orbit. There's a second, probably more important goal, which was to return him safely to Earth. If you can't bring him home safely, then don't even launch the rocket. President Kennedy also stated a time frame: before this decade is out. The US was in a space race against the Russians. We wanted to do our very best for national pride to beat them to the moon. You'll notice that President Kennedy said nothing about the cost, which meant that the US had to be prepared to spend whatever it took to get this done. Hopefully, this all makes sense. Because the high-level project priorities drive the low-level decisions. When you know the first, second, and third priorities of your project, it helps answer many common questions that come up during the delivery, such as whether the project should be done faster or cheaper. It also helps to understand what might have to be sacrificed to stay true to the project parameters. When you're in the thick of project delivery, sometimes hard decisions must be made, and the temptation arises to question the priorities. If the president laid down strategic, immutable parameters, then the project team doesn't have to get sidetracked revisiting questions that have already been answered. Believe it or not, everything we've discussed so far just sets the stage for this next section on practical applications. Let's start by looking at the players who are involved in any project or services engagement. First, you have the customer or user who needs some work done. In this case, the customer wants to build a house, so they start meeting with vendors or service providers who can do the work. The goal is to set up a project to get the work done. Customers typically engage a service provider in a process that looks something like this. A customer identifies a project they want done. They contact several vendors and proceed to conduct several meetings where they describe what they want. The vendor does some analysis and delivers a proposal. The proposal might be revised several times, but eventually the parties come to an agreement, which has a specific billing arrangement. Once the agreement is signed, the vendor delivers the project. The first 4 steps make up the pre-sales work. Our specific focus in the pre-sales process is the billing arrangement. Projects usually have one of 2 billing arrangements: fixed price, where the project costs a specific amount for a specific scope of work. Projects can also be billed on a time and materials basis, where the customer is charged a specific amount for each hour of work performed by the vendor. To understand how to select which billing arrangement works best for the project, we need to talk about the discovery, proposal, and delivery phases of a project, which are all typically driven by the vendor. Each of these phases has several sub-steps that determine whether fixed price or time and materials is best. The first step of the discovery phase is collecting requirements. Next, the vendor must assess the complexity of these requirements, which ultimately drives the size of the project. Once the discovery work is complete, the vendor must refine several project parameters, which we'll talk about a little later. The vendor also must determine the primary risk owner. That is, does the customer or does the vendor shoulder the budgetary or profitability risk? At this point, you have enough to put together a contract which describes the scope, time, and cost of the engagement. Note that the fee structure, or fixed price or time and materials, is part of the project cost. Assuming the contract is accepted, the vendor begins the project management component of the delivery. Now, just about every large project has some potential changes that come up during the post-sales delivery. The customer and vendor must figure out how to adapt to these potential changes. The discovery and proposal phases are part of the pre-sales setup, with the delivery representing the post-sales. The billing model sits between the pre-sales and post-sales phases. All 7 of these substeps are affected by the choice of billing model. We're going to use a balance or scale to illustrate how low-level project details should drive the decision to do either fixed price or time and materials projects. Each low-level detail of the project falls on one side of the balance or the other. When you have all the details on the balance, it should become clear which model is the most appropriate. In this case, this project should be structured for a time and materials billing. But if the customer and vendor make the wrong choice and opt for fixed price billing, the project is unbalanced. Misaligned billing models often result in distressed projects. If the pre-sales setup is done wrong, it's really hard to fix it in post-sales delivery. Put another way, if you crash the car in the pre-sales process, it's very hard to drive that car in post-sales delivery. With that in mind, let's dive into each low-level consideration, starting with the requirements collection. Fixed-price projects works best when the requirements are well-defined in advance. This requires the customer to commit to detailed design decisions and assumptions early in the process. Time and materials projects are best when detailed requirements have not yet been defined. If all you have are high-level concepts only, and the customer is unable to determine design decisions without some investments, then T&M is the way to go. When you look at the overall complexity of the project, fixed-price projects are best for less complex projects. Complexity threatens the profitability of fixed-price projects. T&M projects can be used for both simple and complex projects. Complexity is unpredictable and requires flexibility to adapt to unforeseen changes. When it comes to the project size, fixed-price projects are best with smaller projects because it's difficult to provide accurate cost estimates on larger projects. Large projects have a high risk of cost overruns. T&M projects can work with both large and small projects. The flexible pricing of T&M projects aligns with the uncertainty of larger projects. The downside is T&M projects have a higher risk of price overruns. Project parameters are the low-level details that need to be fleshed out to find any potential pitfalls. Fixed-price projects require more upfront analysis to build a proposal. The vendor must play detective, getting into lots of low-level, precise details, which are then used in some complex pricing model to create the risk mitigated estimate that feeds the proposal. Basically, the consultant must invest resources to build, iterate, and refine the proposal, which increases pre-sales costs. A smart consultant will only invest that time if they feel there's a good chance of winning a project that can be delivered at a profit. Time and materials should be used if there's less time available for upfront analysis or proposal writing. Maybe the customer is in a rush and can't afford a long proposal period. Or maybe the customer can't convince the vendor that they have a real chance of winning the project. In these situations, the vendor usually decides to take rough measurements only, which means they should deliver a T&M proposal. The concept of the primary risk owner is important. In a fixed price project, the consultant assumes the risk of project profitability. Any difficulty assessing the project scope in the pre-sales means mistakes are more likely. Mistakes in a fixed price project hits the consultant's profit on the project. In a time and materials project, the customer assumes the budgetary risk. Any mistakes in the pre-sales estimate will usually result in higher project prices that the customer must absorb. The way the project is managed in the delivery phase is one of the biggest differences between a fixed price and a T&M project. The project manager in a fixed price project will work very hard to avoid changes to the project definition because any changes could affect the project's profit. The vendor also needs to assign a very skilled project manager who has the experience to recognize and push back on changes to the project's scope. This makes the consultant appear inflexible, which is another thing that the project manager needs to manage. Project management in a T&M project is more about tracking progress and reporting status. Like an air traffic controller, the project manager needs to keep a close eye on how things are progressing and give the customer regular updates so they can understand the project's latest scope, time, and cost estimates. Typically, a more junior project manager can play this role. Another nuance that's closely related to the way the project is managed is how well you can adapt to changes. Fixed price projects don't easily adapt to unexpected changes. In fact, the customer may feel like they're dealing with a guard dog or that every change discussion turns into a boxing match. This is unpleasant, but the need to protect the original scope, time, and cost makes adapting to changes hard. Basically, every change results in a change order, possibly, which may increase the cost, delay the end date, or result in something that was in scope being pushed out of scope. Time and materials projects are much more flexible and adaptable to change. The customer enjoys a broader latitude to change the scope, time, or cost in the middle of the project. Finally, there's the big question about the price of the project. The reality is, fixed price projects are going to be more expensive for the customer. The customer must pay more for price certainty. In addition, the consultant will usually add some more padding to the overall project price to account for any potential cost overruns. Time and materials projects are typically going to be less expensive, sometimes a lot less expensive. If the customer wants to minimize the project price, they probably have to go with T&M billing. We've covered a lot, so let's take a moment to summarize. Fixed price projects are best when the customer commits to clear requirements in advance and when the projects are less complex. This also means projects should be smaller. The proposals will require a lot more upfront analysis time, which increases the vendor's cost of sales. That cost of sales is another element that drives up the project price. The consultant assumes the risk on the project's profitability. In addition, the consultant relies on the customer to be reasonable. Unreasonable customers increase the consultant's profit risk even more. The project manager focuses on minimizing changes to the original project definition. It generally works best if the customer has experience building win-win partnerships with past consultants. If the customer doesn't care about the consultant's success or profitability, then the consultant will usually lose every time the customer wins. Fixed price projects also don't adapt to change as well. Customers should only go with fixed price projects if they can accept the consultant saying, "No, not without a change order," as a response. Finally, fixed price projects almost always cost more than T&M projects. The customer must be willing to pay extra for price certainty. In contrast, time and materials projects are best when the customer doesn't know the detailed requirements, which means the consultant must invest some effort to flesh them out. T&M projects can work for both simple and complex projects, and both are appropriate for large and are appropriate for both large and small projects. They don't require as much upfront analysis time to develop the proposal. If the customer really wants to start quickly, then T&M is a better fit. But the customer assumes the budgetary risk for the project. Practically speaking, that means the customer trusts in the consultant's ability and experience. The consultant must be reasonable with the customer and not take advantage of the customer's trust. Project management with T&M projects puts a strong emphasis on tracking progress and reporting status, which means the consultant must have strong capabilities in this area. T&M projects are more adaptable to changes. If the customer wants flexibility to change the scope, schedule, or cost, then T&M is the way to go. And finally, time and materials projects are typically less expensive. If the customer wants to minimize the project price, they should go with T&M. This may seem like a lot to deal with, and it is. Most customers have no idea about all these considerations. That means the vendor must address these issues and lead conversations that build a shared understanding on what billing model works best given the nature of the project. It will help to understand the goals of each party when you try to have these conversations. Customers typically want to create value by completing the project, minimize the project price, and hit the projected deadlines. The consultant wants to deliver a profitable project by effectively managing their costs. There are also several shared goals that are shared between the customer and the consultant. Both parties want to deliver to the original project specifications, minimize risk, minimize hassle, and hopefully develop an ongoing partnership. A mature consultant knows that it's important to talk openly about these goals because creating a shared understanding lays the foundation that leads to a win-win relationship. Both the customer and the consultant benefits when the goals in this Venn diagram are understood. As I stated earlier, I've done management consulting and professional services for decades, so I've seen hundreds of professional services engagements. In my book on startup execution, I have a chapter where I cover the content here in this video. You can get more information about my book, including where you can buy it, by going to the book page on my website. This link will be available in the description for this video. This has been a lot of information, so we thank you for staying until now. Hopefully you can see how we follow a structured process to teach and deliver our training. Our content is also drawn from decades of real-world experience, including 5 different startups with 3 exits and many large company roles as well. We try to go deep with our content as we don't think 1-minute sound bites are very effective. We also take extra time to build visual content, as studies show that visual aids increase learning by 400%. We also package actionable, color-by-numbers templates with a lot of our premium training content. Many founders have taken advantage of our training and coaching and provided a lot of great feedback. We're particularly proud of one member's comment where he said, "That was the most efficient breakdown of a complex topic I've seen in all my fumbling around with different startup content." Our audience appreciates our visual delivery of deep dive startup training and coaching. We hope you'll check out our content for yourself and consider buying it, as that helps us fund our efforts to build more free and premium content to help you succeed. If this was helpful, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click the bell to be notified when we release new content. When you do this, YouTube promotes our videos to others, which allows us to spend less time on our marketing and more time creating startup content for you. We hope this video helps you build a very healthy, fundable startup.